3, 2, 1, and we're underway.
Hello and welcome to Cycling Insights, your cycling podcast brought to you by L'Etape Australia by Tour de France. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on your favourite podcast app. Give us a follow and leave us a review. Hello and welcome to another episode of Cycling Insights. Matthew Keenan with you, joined once again by Simon Gerrans. And Gerro, we've got a huge show ahead of us because guess what? Racing is back on. And we're going to get to talk to Amanda Spratt, who's actually started racing again.
How good is it that the season feels like it's finally underway, version 2? Like, there's so much coming up. We've got such a jam-packed few months ahead of us. It's great to finally have some real racing to speak about.
Yeah, and we catch up with Amanda Spratt a little bit later on. And one of the images coming out of the return to racing is the women going up to sign on with face masks on. It was an extraordinary image to see them at that sign-on period. We're going to get a few training tips. A lot of us have been training indoors. I've ridden my first race on Zwift. We're going to do our fast interviews. What do you prefer, the Giro or the Tour? And the Olympics are meant to be on at the moment. So I want to get a few insights from you on the experience of going to the Olympics and the transition from the Tour through to the Olympic Games. But first up, before we get into the main body of the cycling news that's been happening, for a lot of us, for the weekend warriors, and I'm absolutely one of those, Garmin having been hacked and the Russians holding them to ransom for the tune of $10 million, I'm struggling to keep up with how many steps I've done, Simon.
That's so funny, but it's not just for the weekend warriors. It's actually for the World Tour pros as well. I was out on a ride with Rowan Dennis during the week, and he was telling me, I haven't been able to send any of my files through to my coach for the past week because of this Garmin hacking scandal. We just can't share that information like we normally do.
Did he like that? Was that a good thing for Rowan or a bad thing, or it was just a whatever, I'll deal with it and move on?
Well, we did stop for a cold drink along the ride, and I said, "Hey, Rowan, are you allowed to stop for a drink here? Is that allowed from your coach?" And he said, "Well, you know what? He's not looking at my files at the moment anyway, so it doesn't matter." So I think he was quite happy with the fact.
Fantastic. Well, fingers crossed it all gets resolved and we can get back online, because one of the great things about that platform is being able to compare your numbers to your mates that you go for a ride with on the weekend. But I don't want to compare mine to the guys that you're going for a ride with, because comparing my numbers to Rowan Dennis is only going to be depressing.
Yeah, for me too. Absolutely. Yeah, the guys that I'm riding with down here at the moment, they're all super sharp, raring to go for the racing coming up. So normally the numbers are pretty good, but at this moment in time, I think they're seriously impressive.
How is he, Rowan?
No, he's great. He's got plenty of racing coming up. I think he kicks off underway, within the next couple of weeks like everyone does, but he looks super fit. He's been doing altitude training camps, which I think pretty much the entire World Tour peloton have been doing, and he's looking sharp.
Yeah, so you're in Spain at the moment, and the racing got back underway in Spain this weekend. And we've always spoken about in cycling the curse of the rainbow jersey. And Annemiek van Vleuten, she'd be well within her rights to think that the curse is real. But there were 3 races over the weekend in Spain, and she won all 3 of them. She rode one race at the start of the season, the weekend opener in Belgium, and she won that as well. She's ridden 4 races this year, Simon. She's won all 4. Some curse.
That's not a bad run at it. I'll be interested to know what the record is for consecutive wins from the start of the season in professional cycling, because I think that's that record, whatever it may be. Annemiek's in fear of taking that one.
What does it tell you about Annemiek's character, that she's been able to get through this period of the lockdown and she's able to come out all guns blazing and go 3 out of 3 with the return to racing?
Well, I think a real testament to Annemiek as a cyclist is interesting. I was speaking with my younger brother, who, funnily enough, he works for Mitchelson Scott as an osteopath. And I said, have you had much interaction with the women's team of recent? And what's are they training together? The guys and the girls, what's it been like? And he said, yeah, we've done a few bits and pieces together. And he said, all the guys have been really impressed by Annemiek. because she will just bury herself in every session. She will fight. The guys might drop her on a climb, but she will come back. She'll fight to come back, and she is a seriously hard worker. And I think that shows through in the level of her racing these days. She's just a battler, and she's a real winner.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the Olympics a little bit later on, but in the context of the Olympics being postponed for a year, she's the one athlete I feel sorry for. She was there. She almost had the gold medal in her hands in Rio until she crashed in 2016. And with the form that she's in right now, it looks like she's in the form of her life, and the Olympics are meant to be on as we speak.
Yeah, well, you do feel for her, but you kind of see at this point in time, she seems like she's head and shoulders above everybody else in the women's peloton. So as long as she plays it smart and she doesn't do anything too silly and really bury herself in the next 12 months, there's no indication whatsoever that she's still not going to be at this level next year.
Yeah, she's moving into her late 30s, but she's faster than she was in her early 30s. She's only getting stronger. So hats off to the world champion, Annemiek van Vleuten. The men's side of the peloton, racing has gotten back underway, but there's a big race starting on Tuesday in Spain, the Vuelta a Burgos. Normally a lead-up race to the Vuelta a España, and normally a pretty good race with a reasonable start list. Now this year, it's got the best start list it has ever had.
There is an absolute all-star lineup in Vuelta a Burgos this year. I was just looking at the start list last night, actually, and you've got favourites for the Tour de France in there. You've got some of the world's best sprinters. The race organizer there, he must be just rubbing his hands together, thinking about the result sheet of his race, and it's gonna stand out in time.
It was interesting to see the Israel Startup Nation team. They've had to leave one of the riders off their team because of a COVID protocol or a COVID just being safe. But he did not test positive to coronavirus, but he was in close contact. He was a close contact to another rider on the team who did test positive. So they didn't want to take the risk of taking him to the race. And that is probably going to set the pattern for what a lot of other teams do for other races as well. And it shows how careful everybody is going to have to be around their protocols for coronavirus.
Yeah, and I think there is some really stringent protocols being put in place for the teams and the races. I understand they all have to do a test before every race they turn up to at the cost of the team. And these tests aren't cheap. And by the time you test every rider and every member of the personnel leading into a race before every race, it's going to be in the tens of thousands of euros just to test everybody, to make sure everybody is test negative before the races actually start. So there's a lot to take into consideration. So it's going to be a difficult time for the teams. But moving on to another race that's imminent on the calendar, Tour of Poland, with no media and no spectators. How is that going to feel?
So if there's no media covering it and Garmin's not up and working, so it doesn't get loaded up to Strava, did the race really happen?
Well, I think everyone is just going to, rely on pretty much on the race website for results, basically. And I think, that's obviously what we'll all be hanging on to see how everyone's going there. But I was really looking forward to following a race like the Tour of Poland as a bit of a form indicator leading into the Tour de France.
Yeah, and what does it mean for sponsors? Because if you're a sponsor, the key part of the race is actually having people see your logo, whether that's spectators on the side of the road or whether that is a 90-second news clip that goes out around the globe. So that's a big loss again for the sport, and the teams are being hit because their sponsors aren't getting that exposure. I understand why the Tour of Poland have put those restrictions in place. They have to for the race to go ahead, but it hurts the teams again.
Yeah, but surely the Tour of Poland are going to have in-house photographers, media people.
Yeah, they have to.
Getting some imagery to distribute to the wider network. So you'd hope that they're just not going, it's like a club race and no one else is going to be around. You really hope that a race of this level, this stature, will still be distributing some imagery and some content to the world news feeds, basically.
Yeah, and every other race that's still to come on the calendar, we'll be watching really closely, how they do it, how successful they are, what sort of coverage they get as a result of it. The race that will get a lot of coverage is this weekend, Saturday the 1st, Strade Bianche. both the men's and the women's race. Normally it's at the start of the season, so it's cold weather and the white roads of Tuscany can be a little bit muddy. This weekend, the forecast is into the high 30s, potentially 40 degrees. This is a brutal race under any conditions. One of the first races back, this is going to be a tough day in the saddle.
Yeah, for sure. And Strade Bianche, I only ever competed in it once. I didn't make it all the way to the finish, but this is one of my favourite races of the year to watch. For me, it's nearly on par with watching a Paris-Roubaix. It's just so dramatic. It's such a beautiful area. The race is, at a World Tour level, it's only been around for a couple of years, but it just feels like there's so much history with this race riding across the white roads in Tuscany. So I'm really looking forward to this one.
So another one that has popped up once again, and I'm looking forward to that race for the same reasons you've just spoken about. It is a beautiful race, one of the best additions to world cycling. It's popped up again. So the Mitchelton Scott team almost became the Manuela Foundation. Now we're seeing the CCC team managed by Jim Okowicz, the Polish-based team as it is now. It's folding at the end of the season. The Manuela Foundation from Spain, from the south of Spain, they've gone to the table once again and said, we've got a $10 million check. They're interested in buying the license and getting in the sport. They're not going away, Gero.
They're persistent. You have to give them that, which is great. So, you know what? If it all stacks up with this Manuela Foundation and they're good for that $10 million offer for a license and they have the resources to back a team, hey, fantastic. I did hear...
Okay. So you're a rider agent, right? Put yourself... we're going to play scenario game here. You're a rider agent. You've got a 25-year-old who's got an offer on the table from a team that's been taken over by the Manuela Foundation. And let's say that it's at $200,000. Or you've got an offer on the table from a stable long-term team such as, I don't know, Sunweb or Movistar or Ineos, and it's at $100,000. Which team do you go for?
Oh, I'll go to the latter every time as a young up-and-coming rider, but I'm talking as an additional sponsor, an additional team in the sport, or to keep a team alive. I hope that the UCI will go through the stringent process of doing their due diligence on this foundation to make sure their money is there and, they do have the resources to back a team. And if that's all gone through that process, you've got to basically have confidence in the governing body that they're good for the money. And if there is anything to find out along them through that process, you hope they would uncover that. But by the time they're in a position to actually sign riders, I really hope that they're good for their money.
Yeah, so do I, because on the outside, they make me a little nervous, taking a look at them from the outside. I'd love to be proven wrong. On the topic of switching teams, Chris Froome, it has been announced that he's leaving Ineos. Next year, he'll be riding with Israel Startup Nation. So the big decision for Ineos this year is, do they take Chris Froome to the Tour de France? If you're the sports director, if you're Dave Brailsford or you're making the final decision at Ineos, do you take Chris Froome to the Tour?
If he's going good enough. If Chris Froome is putting out the numbers that he has done in the past...
What's good enough?
Well, he's got to be...
Is it good enough to win or is it good enough to support someone else?
No, he's got to be good enough to win. No, Chris Froome doesn't have he's not a worker. You don't take Chris Froome to a race to help someone else win. You take Chris Froome to a race to win himself. So if Chris Froome is doing as good as numbers as Geraint Thomas or Egan Bernal, then you take him to the Tour de France because he's a great option. If he is even slightly off what those guys are at, you got to leave him at home, because those guys are going to need the support already. You know my feelings about splitting leadership in teams. To go with two leaders is a stretch, but to go with three for me is like completely off the cards, unless this guy is actually showing, we can actually round out the podium at the Tour de France with three guys. Could
you imagine that? 1, 2, 3.
I could imagine that.
Could imagine it with Ineos.
You could. Yeah.
This year is kind of different though. Like we alluded to before with Walter Burgos and Israel Startup Nation making that call on a rider and not taking him to the race because he was a close contact of somebody with coronavirus. Your leaders could fall over pretty quickly before you even get to the start line. because of just some of those little things that are out of their control. And it might not have anything to do with a crash or anything to do with form. So to have an extra potential winner this year probably plays a bigger role than if it was in a normal year. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't take him. This year, I would.
Interesting. But I think even to have him in that squad and part of the team up until the dying moments, like everyone's going to have to be on form at the same time this year. So it's not like you're structuring your season so you're peaking in a whole different year if you're not point in the year if you're not focused on the Tour de France. It's a couple of weeks either way. So they might as well get all these guys preparing for their season as it's coming up, as they're all targeting the Tour de France. And literally the last week in the race, they could call the team and say, all right, these are our guys that we're going with. These are the leaders. This is who's healthy. Let's take these guys. This is our best team for the Tour de France. And you know what? Chris or Geraint or Egan, if you're not quite there, you can do, the Giro d'Italia, which is not so far down the track.
If they don't select Chris Froome, I'd love to have a phone tap on that conversation that goes to Chris Froome to tell the 4-time winner of the Tour that he's not part of the team.
That would be an interesting. Listen, he has to see. He wouldn't be blindsided by that phone call. He has to understand the situation that they're at the moment, the question mark over his condition. But there's a couple of races I'm sure he'll do before the Tour de France. So we'll see what sort of shape he's in.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm watching that space really, really closely. Another space that I'm watching with a guy who I really like. I enjoy his company. Had the chance to interview him earlier on this year at the Tour Down Under. Froome and Bardet. He's been with your first ever pro team, AG2R Le Mondial, since the start of his pro career. Rumours are pretty strong about him leaving that team, and I think it would be a good thing. He carries the pressure of being the leader of one of France's biggest teams, if not its biggest team, on par with Groupama FDJ. He leads that French squad as a French rider in France's biggest sporting event. I think he needs a fresh start.
I was chatting with Roman just a couple of weeks ago, actually, and we're talking about the possibility of a team transfer and that sort of thing. And I was kind of talking to him about my experiences changing teams, and I often found it was just a bit of a breath of fresh air, particularly if you'd been in a team for an extended period of time. I said, you're not going to find a team where there are no problems, but they'll just be new problems. So the things that have been grating at you for a number of years at AG2R, they won't be they won't be the problems anymore. Going to a new environment, there'll be different things. It'll be a different culture, and it might be the breath of fresh air you needed. So I know he was seriously considering a team change, and I don't think it'd be a bad thing for him. Don't get me wrong, AG2R is a fantastic team. I've got nothing but good things to say about them. But for Roman, I think a team change would be great because he would, like you said, he'd be carrying a lot of weight on his shoulders in that organisation. He not only just targets the Tour de France. You saw last year, I think he was on the podium in Strade Bianchi. He's up there in a lot of races he starts. Again, he's a real racer. So, he's shouldering a lot of pressure in that organisation.
So from your experience, when you were at the team that we now call Mitchelton Scott, did it become a burden being the Aussie leader on an Aussie team, carrying the responsibility of getting the big results for the team? How much did that pressure build?
Oh, listen, there was a lot of pressure in that. There is a lot of pressure in that environment, but I think no one puts more pressure on the rider than the rider themselves, especially someone who is very professional in their approach. They're very meticulous about how they go about things. So there is always a lot of external pressure, but most of it comes from within.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one guy who's put pressure on the results sheet a couple of years after retirement is Alberto Contador. We spoke about it last time, Lockie Morton breaking the Everesting world record. Alberto came out and broke the record by, I think it was about 2.5 minutes. When you're talking about a 7.5 hour ride, like that's pretty tight, right? But Alberto, he loves to ride his bike. Everesting takes a fair commitment.
Say everyone needs a hobby, and Alberto it's gone from his profession to his hobby. Like obviously the guy is so passionate about racing his bike. When I heard about that, I jumped on his Instagram page, and you look at it, every single shot there is of him out riding or doing different things. He looks as fit as. There's no big surprises there that Contador went, I might have a crack at that. And he doesn't do things by halves, this guy.
No, he could step back into the pro peloton and be super, super competitive.
Oh, no question. No question whatsoever.
Yeah.
If he wasn't winning races, I would be very surprised.
Yeah. Okay. So that's our news roundup. A look at some of the key things that have caught our attention in news. What we should be talking about at the moment is the start of the Olympics in Tokyo. So I want to talk about your Olympic experience. Can you remember when you got the nod for the first time to say, Simon Gerrans, you're going to the Olympic Games?
No, funnily enough, I don't remember the specific call in to go to any of the Olympic Games that I was selected in. And my Olympic experiences were all very different. So I competed in Beijing and London, and I was selected to go to Rio as well. However, I crashed in the Tour de France, so withdrew myself from the team. But the Olympics is amazing. It's such a fantastic atmosphere. Unfortunately, coming in from cycling, it doesn't really feel like you're as involved with the national team as a lot of the other sports are. Say, for example, a lot of the Australian teams competing at the Olympic Games, they'll be preparing maybe at the AIS or something, so they're having quite a lot of interaction with the other athletes from their country competing in other sports. Whereas in cycling, you kind of plucked out of your professional team and dropped in the Olympic Village. And you obviously you know the other cyclists there, but you don't have really strong relationships with the sort of the track and field athletes or the swimmers or anything like that. But for me, one of the big memories of the Olympic Games in each one is the dining hall. My goodness, you see athletes of all shapes and sizes and some of the biggest stars in the world just basically going about their day, getting their breakfast or their lunch, whatever. But that is something that's pretty amazing.
Esteban Chavez was set the challenge by Dan Jones to get as many photos with basketball players as he possibly could when he was at the dining hall. I think Esteban's about 164 centimetres tall, so he kept getting photos with basketball players and then sending them to Dan Jones.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I can't remember what Olympic Games it was. It might have been Beijing, and the American basketball team arrived in the village, and they were mobbed by the other athletes. Okay, you're talking world class athletes, the best at their game. And they're absolute fans of the American basketball team. And I think they were only in there for one day and they realised it was probably a bit much. So they then ate outside the dining hall.
I did an interview with Cam Meyer at the Tour Down Under earlier on this year, and he spoke about the experience at the dining hall and that there was a little Australian guy that was lining up to get his food. And he said he looked like he was, maybe just around about 60 kilos at most. And there were a bunch of rowers that pushed in front of him. And he told them to get to the back of the queue, and they didn't get to the back of the queue. He said, get to the back of the queue. And one of the rowers said, make me. And he just landed a short jab on this guy's chin, and he was on the deck. The guy was a boxer. And so Cam's takeout from it was, be careful in the dining hall at the Olympics because everybody is amongst the best in the world at something.
Yeah, that's really funny. But it's interesting because I never saw any kind of animosity in the dining hall. It's a real festival kind of atmosphere.
Celebration.
It's a celebration. Everyone is so happy to be there. That's something. But as far as competing in professional cycling events and the Olympic Games, it's again a completely different dynamic. You go from racing in small teams. In the Olympic Games there was only 4 or 5 riders in each team. So how you use your resources within the team are very different compared to in a professional race where at that point in time it was pretty much 8 or 9 riders in every race you lined up in. And it's actually really difficult to pick out not so much your teammates, but your competitors as well, because you're used to seeing everybody in a trade team jersey. And all of a sudden then they're in an Olympic edition jersey that you've never seen before. So to actually spot out someone like Valverde or, it would have been a Vinokurov or a Bettini or someone like that at the time, it was very difficult to actually spot them in the peloton and sort of say, oh, so-and-so's gone away in a breakaway or so-and-so's attacking, because you didn't know who they were.
Yeah, because it's a completely unfamiliar environment in terms of what they're wearing and so on. You spoke about this one time before, the difference between, you rode the Tour in 2008, won a stage to Prato Novoso, huge event for you. And then you went to the Olympics in Beijing, the biggest sporting event on the globe, and there were no spectators. It was like coronavirus anticipated. There were no spectators there at all, no atmosphere.
Yeah, I think that's what we're referring to. What would it be like to race with no crowds? And that was my example. One other thing I remember from that Beijing Olympics, there were little sort of roadside runoffs, sort of car park areas where they literally had rent a crowd. And there was like a group of probably factory workers or something like that. Someone standing in front of them with a little sign, and every time you come past, the guy would hold the sign up. It said clap, and these guys would stand on the side of the road and clap like mad while you went past. And then you see the sign would come down, and they would just stand there and wait again for you to complete another lap. It was a funny atmosphere.
Oh, that's the applause light at a sitcom. That is outrageous. Well, the big prospect for Australia at the Tokyo Olympics on the road is Amanda Spratt. Spratty has just returned to racing, and I caught up with her just a couple of moments ago. Let's have a listen to what Amanda Spratt had to say about her return to racing. Amanda Spratt, you're finally out of COVID lockdown. You're back into racing. How did it feel to pin a number on?
Oh, felt great to pin a number on. I think it's been over 6 months between that, being able to do that. So, yeah, I just come back from Spain. I raced 3 races there, and it's just great to be back with the team. It felt really strange, but also just like normal again. So it was just great to be back.
I want to talk about that experience, but before we get to that, I want your 1-sentence response to one name, Annemiek van Vleuten.
Phenomenal. Yeah. What can you say? She's raced 4 races this year and she's won every single one of them, and solo breakaways. Yeah, she's on another level right now and just impressive. And I mean, the scary thing is we just did 3 races in Spain, and the 3rd race we knew we had a really steep climb to finish with, and every single team knew they didn't want to arrive at the bottom of that climb with her and did everything they could not to, but they still did, and she just rode away again. So it's like people know what's going to happen and they just haven't been able to avoid it so far. Happy she's
the most extraordinary. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she's the person you want as your teammate. It's the most extraordinary year, and there's the myth of the curse of the rainbow jersey. But she's got a perfect record. She's ridden 4 races this year and she's had 4 wins. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, no, I think she's aware of that. She said, at first people wanted to interview me about the curse, and now they, want to interview about almost the opposite of that. So I think she's just proving everyone wrong, and she's just amazing, phenomenal athlete in person.
What does it tell us about her ability to stay motivated in that lockdown period? To me, it speaks volumes to her character.
I think so, yeah. And I mean, yeah, we were speaking quite a lot in the lockdown as well. And I know she's also human, she's not just a robot. She had those down days and times when she just wasn't motivated and wondering what to do. But I think, once that calendar came out, that focus came back. And yeah, I was up at altitude with her in Lavinia for a while training. So you could see that the motivation and passion was there. And yeah, I mean, she trains crazy hard, and she'll always sort of search out the hardest way to train as well, and it's really evident in the way she can then race.
I can imagine that one person that's really relieved from the pro peloton is Mark Cavendish after having been dropped by you guys out training.
Yeah, I can imagine, poor Mark. So yeah, we put him to the sword on the Stelvio Pass. Hopefully people saw that bit of footage, but I'm sure he's pleased to see that, yeah, she is actually killing everyone.
Yeah, as I'm sure you'd agree, it was really classy the way Mark Cavendish handled that and actually put that out there. I thought the way Mark Cavendish promoted him asking both you and Annemiek to slow down was his way of telling people, hey, respect women's cycling.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, Mark Cavendish is someone who's always been a supporter of women's cycling. I mean, I remember seeing tweets from him like World Championships saying, the women's road race, that was the most exciting event of the championships. And I think for us, that's actually really important to have, some of the male pros and some of the more high profile riders as well, really making an effort to say that and to support us, because I think that really makes a difference.
Okay, now back to you. What's it like the morning of the first race when you return after not having raced since really February or March?
Oh, it's like a mixture of nerves, excitement, trepidation. You're just wondering, how it's going to be. It was almost a weird feeling because we turned up at the team hotel and you're kind of seeing riders from all different teams, and maybe you weren't really friends with them, but you feel really excited to see everyone and waving. And yeah, I mean, we're not hugging these days, we're more elbow tapping if we see someone, but yeah, it's sort of like a strange feeling, but mostly just excitement to get out there and race. And I mean, this is what our job is. This is what we train for, is to race. So it's just that, yeah, a mixture of nerves, excitement, but just, yeah, happiness almost.
Was it weird posing for photos with masks on?
So strange. You realise we went to the first race and you went up on the podium and did the hand sanitizer, and we're not allowed to sign on anymore. We just show our numbers and someone touches the pen and signs on for us. And then you get the photo taken and you realise you're smiling and looking at different cameras, and then you realise actually you don't even need to smile. You've got your glasses on and your mask and it's not necessary. And yeah, you almost feel a little bit gangster doing it, but it's a bizarre feeling, man. The last race we did, I don't know if you saw a photo, they made us stand on a set of stairs, like all sort of spaced apart as well, and it felt like we were about to start a dance routine or something, but yeah.
I did see that photo.
Yeah.
I saw that photo. Another image that I saw, and I love this in the Basque Country because they love their cycling, and there were big crowds. They were out in really strong numbers, particularly on that brutally steep final climb that you made reference to. And all the spectators there, they've got real respect for cycling. They were all there with face masks on as well.
Yeah, and that's what we found. Like we arrived in that area, and I think because Spain was one of the hardest hit areas, like they take it really seriously. You know, everyone's wearing the face masks. There's a lot of respect for us, obviously, that try to keep us in the team bubbles. And I mean, it is easy to forget sometimes, especially the social distancing. But if you just say to someone, hey, just give me a bit of space, it's like, no worries. Everyone's really, really respectful. But it's still great that they can come out and watch a bike race and cheer for us. And as you said, like the Basque fans are, incredible. It's one reason I really, really love racing there.
So you've got 3 races underneath your wheels now. This weekend, though, is a big one. Back to the World Tour level racing. And I think this is one of the most beautiful races that's come on to the World Cycling calendar in the past decade or so, Strade Bianche. How excited are you about this one?
Yeah, very excited. It's one of my favourite races. It's probably one of the hardest races we do all year. It's just intense from the start because, you've got these gravel sectors, everyone wants to be at the front, and it's just like a war of attrition out there. You have to be technically good on the climbs, and yeah, it's going to be quite different because normally we do it at the beginning of March. We normally wake up in pitch black. We're walking over snow to the breakfast buffet to eat breakfast, and now it's August. I just checked the forecast. I think it's going to hit close to 40 degrees. We're starting at midday in the middle of the day, so there's going to be that extra element, I think, of just who can survive the heat and the intensity. And yeah, I think it'll be one of those races where lights will go out pretty quickly. We might get 3 hours in and then all of a sudden you've got nothing left, or the breakaway goes and then there's just nothing left to chase. Yeah, I think it's going to make it exciting.
How does it change the way you eat throughout the race or the way you can prepare for the race versus where it normally sits in the calendar, where it starts at 9 o'clock and, as you mentioned, you're walking across snow to go to breakfast versus being in August, starting at midday, and it can be potentially 40 degrees. How does that change the nutrition side of things for you?
Yeah, firstly, I think, just the heat itself, like it's just going to be so important to be hydrated before. So there'll be a lot of hydration happening and pre-cooling, whether we're using like the ice towels, the slushies, just to sort of cool that body temperature before. But yeah, I mean, just being able to get hold of water and bottles, and it's a little bit trickier these days with the protocols. You have to make sure you're only getting it from your own team. So that's going to be really important to have as many people as we can out on course to just try and get that fluid in. And then, yeah, just eating a lot. I mean, we know when it's really, really hot, you're also burning more carbs as well. So yeah, and it's funny because when it's that hot, at times you don't really feel like eating as much, but you almost have to keep reminding yourself that it's so important too. So yeah, just try to get as much in as possible.
What conditions do you prefer, the hot or the cold?
If I had to choose, I prefer the hot, I think. Yeah, I always think, when it's really, really cold, I probably struggle a bit more, and probably just because I've never grown up, riding in like really, really cold temperatures. So, we're from Australia, we don't mind the hot, and a lot of the heat over here is that dry heat, which is what I'm used to back home as well.
Yeah, and then what's on the calendar for you after this? Because the whole calendar effectively has been crammed into the last 3 or 4 months of what is the 2020 season.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy period. Obviously, a lot still is, dependent on COVID. We've just seen the Bowls Ladies Tour, the Holland Tour, at the beginning of September has just been cancelled because of the restrictions in Holland. But for me, the general plan is after Strade, I'm going to do a block at altitude with really specific preparation for the World Championships. And then my big target period is the Giro, Giro, the World Championships, and then the Ardennes Classic. So that's pretty much mid-September to mid-October. And the Worlds is like the number one goal in that period.
And then come home to Kiama to beat your dad and your brother and win the Sprat Cup at L'Etape Australia.
Yeah, that's probably the absolute peak goal for the season, would be to win the Sprat Cup, have a bit of a rest and do a big training block ahead of that. But yeah, I can't wait to be in Kiama. I've just been looking at photos again of that region and so beautiful.
Well, fantastic, Spratty. It's great to see that you're back out there racing. Stay safe, stay at the front, and good luck this weekend across the dusty white roads of Tuscany.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'll be getting dust out of myself for the next months, I think.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Winners Sports Nutrition. Winners Sports Nutrition are proudly Australian-made and owned and have been since 2005. Winners are proud to support athletes, community causes and international events such as L'Etape Australia by Tour de France. Winners products are also used and recommended by Cadel Evans. Winners are providing a special offer to all Cycling Insights listeners. 60 items for $100. It's a saving of 30%. The offer consists of a mix of their great tasting energy gels, bars and chews, and this is the perfect package to get your nutrition sorted for your indoor and outdoor rides. Simply head to winnersbars.com.au to take advantage of the offer. So, Gero, Amanda Spratt, she's back, she's racing. She'll be riding Strada Bianca on the weekend. Her big target this season is the World Championships. But looking forward to the Olympic Games, what's your advice on dealing with the Olympics particularly, and the fact that you've got smaller teams, strategically it can be a lot harder, and the fact that it's that one event, particularly in women's cycling, because it doesn't get the attention, doesn't have a Tour de France in terms of the attention that it gets. It's the one event where the whole nation will really be watching Amanda, and she'll be publicised as a potential gold medalist.
Well, that's a difficult one, but I think, Amanda's really proven herself in these one-day races. She's been a consistent performer at the World Championships the past few years, and she has really earned that role of leadership in the team. So without knowing the intricate details of the parkour at the Olympic Games, Spratty's obviously a big shot, and I think the girls around her will have absolute confidence in her that she's going to be able to deliver. So as long as they put all their resources behind her and give her that best shot at it, I think she's in with a real shout.
I'll tell you what she doesn't need. She doesn't need any training tips from me. But for those of us who are doing L'Etape in November in Kiama, we could do with some training tips from you. So lockdown has been a bit of a challenge. And one of the things that a few people have done is they've ridden all the streets of their suburb. I'm not sure whether you saw the news interview with the woman that said she's done all of Brighton and it's become known as the Karen. Did you see that interview?
No, I never saw that interview, but I half wonder whether riding all the streets of your suburb is flirting the rules a little bit when it comes to lockdown. Like, I think these lockdown measures are in place to keep people at home and to mitigate any kind of potential spread of this virus. So actually being out there and riding every street in your suburb, I'm not sure if it's exactly the right thing to do, but I see it's happening quite often.
Yeah, so one of my good mates, he rode every street in his suburb in Pascoe Vale on Sunday. So I did a Zwift ride with a bunch of mates on Saturday morning with Zoom going as well. So I was done by 9 o'clock and I could spend the rest of the day with my wife and kids. So this guy, and I'm going to name him, Anthony Fuster, I'm talking about you. 10:25 on Sunday morning, he heads out the door and he rode every street in his postcode, not just his suburb, in his postcode. It was 120-something kilometres. It took him 5.5 hours and he didn't leave home until 10:30. So his wife was stuck at home all day with the kids, right? You know what I like about that, Gero? Is the next time I'm asking permission to go out just for a little bit longer or something or other, I've got Fewey as a reference point to me not being as bad as Fewey.
That's the best part about knowing people, having mates that are like that. They make you look good.
Yeah.
They make you look good every time.
It's context.
Yeah, it's all in context. But he obviously doesn't like being at home too much, this guy, if that's what he wants to do. But training tips in lockdown. I didn't think we were going to be talking about this again, about how you survive a lockdown and keep fit. But Matt, I think you've probably been the most disciplined trainer in lockdown of anybody I know.
Yeah, I've been loving it. I'm a Zwiftaholic. I'm addicted to it. And I actually rode my first Zwift race last week. It was on a Wednesday. It was the Aussie Crit Crushers. And it's really short. It's like 10 Ks, right? And it's starting at 7 a.m. in the morning. I lost sleep the night before worrying about the start because I knew it'd be full gas at the start. So I did about a 20-minute warm-up for what was a 15-minute race.
It's like doing a prologue all over again. And it's from what I understand, I never thought Zwift racing was tactical. I thought it's basically go down there and ride as hard as you can. But I'm learning there's all these tricks to it as well. Say, for example, in the virtual Tour de France, I understand if you're not doing 350 watts 10 seconds before the flag drops, you're at the back and your race is over.
Correct.
Yeah.
I did my first sprint at the 30-second countdown for the clock. And what was also fascinating after I did the race was on Zwift Power, it then tells you on the results sheet what everybody's watts per kilo was. So the winner of the race that I did was Wes Salzberger, who you raced with, and Wes rode the Tour de France in 2010. And for the race, he averaged 4.6 watts per kilo. I was 11 seconds behind. I averaged 4.5 watts per kilo. So I wasn't too far off. But there was a guy who finished sixth who averaged 4.9. But this was the guy that was just attacking all the time. He'd get reeled back in, attack, get reeled back. So he was stronger than everybody else potentially, but didn't win the race. So tactics actually matter.
There you go. I never thought that would be the case of doing Zwift racing, but yeah.
Nor did I.
Yeah, mate, you're the expert in the Zwift racing. I can't give you any input on what tactics you might implement to win a Zwift race, apart from a hard start. But on these races, and you hear of guys doing super long stints on the ergos, what about eating and drinking and food intake on these?
Yeah, so that's the beauty of it. So I do a ride on a Saturday morning with a bunch of mates, and it's about 2 hours. I take my breakfast out to the garage with me. And it's also part of breaking up the ride. So I actually had breakfast whilst I was riding. But if you get something like some of the winners bars or something along those lines to have something to actually chew on, the good thing is you don't have to worry about, potentially dropping a wrapper accidentally or, slipping on the handlebars as you're trying to get the thing open. I even, on Saturday morning, I took a double shot latte out to the garage with me to drink throughout the first 10-minute warm-up. Because to make it entertaining, I was also on Zoom with a dozen of my mates, courtesy of one of my mates' company with his corporate account. It was fantastic.
Oh, that's great. And not so long ago, Dave Macca riding across, doing the Ram virtually, and you two take him some pastries to eat along the way as well, no?
Yeah, I took some pastries to him, and then my wife had seen the transaction on our NAB app, on our bank account. And I walked back in the door after having gone to visit Macca, and I got him, a few pastries, a couple of croissants and a few other bits and pieces. And I've walked back in the door empty-handed. And my wife was expecting me to come back in with pastries to have with coffee at home. I got sent back out the door again.
Hilarious. She's got a close tab on you, Cynthia has.
Oh, she's right on it. Don't worry. She is the Minister for Finance and Home Affairs.
Fantastic.
Absolutely. All right. So enjoy your riding. Try and make it as fun as you can. If you can do group rides in the garage with your mates, hook up on something like Zoom or similar and just try and engage with people. Make it as fun as you can. Join some of the events that are online. That's a good way to keep it entertaining and break it up as well. Today's podcast is brought to you by Winners Sports Nutrition. Winners Sports Nutrition are proudly Australian-made and owned and have been since 2005. Winners are proud to support athletes, community causes and international events such as L'Etape Australia by Tour de France. Winners products are also used and recommended by Cadel Evans. Winners are providing a special offer to all Cycling Insights listeners. 60 items for $100. It's a saving of 30%. The offer consists of a mix of their great tasting energy gels, bars, and chews, and this is the perfect package to get your nutrition sorted for your indoor and outdoor rides. Simply head to winnersbars.com.au to take advantage of the offer. We've got our normal fast questions now before we get into some audience questions. And one of them is incidentally about the impact of Zwift racing on real racing, which I thought was a good question. But first up, Gero, which race did you prefer to ride? The Tour de France or the Giro d'Italia?
The Tour de France, no question about that. Yeah, I competed in 2 Giro d'Italias and I think 12 Tour de Frances. The first time the Giro d'Italia I competed in, it finished in Rome. I made it all the way to the finish, and I thought, if that's the last Giro d'Italia I'll ever do, I'll be very happy. Funnily enough, I lined up again a few years later and crashed out. I wore the pink jersey in the second one, won a stage in the first one I did, so I didn't have bad results at the Giro. But yeah, I always preferred the Tour de France every time. How about yourself?
Yeah. From a commentary perspective, I've only ever commentated the Giro from Sydney. I've never actually done it on the ground. So I'd actually like to do it in Italy and experience traveling around on the Giro. But if you're only ever going to commentate one race per year, it's the Tour, hands down. There's no discussion that needs to be entered into because there's the most at stake. And it's got nothing to do with the terrain, how beautiful it is, how good the food might be in one country compared to the other. Whatever event has the most at stake is the most important to commentate on.
Yeah, and the most important to race as well. I found you turn up at a race like the Giro d'Italia, there's always sort of people there. It's just a part of their season. It might be a bit of a build up to something else. They might be doing some a big block and dropping out to prepare for another race, something like that. The Tour de France, everyone is in peak condition. It's everybody's target. It is the most important race on the calendar. So, yeah, from a rider's perspective, the Tour de France was always the most important of the Grand Tours.
We agree.
Onto more of a fashion question, Matt. Wearing your cap under your helmet, is it allowed or is it criminal?
What is the temperature? It comes down to the temperature. If it is cold and raining, it's allowed. If it's clear blue skies, it is a criminal offence against fashion.
I would agree wholeheartedly.
Because you would have worn it. You would have worn a cap underneath your helmet racing a few times to keep the water out of your eyes a little bit, I imagine.
Yeah, the cap to wear under your helmet, it is a very useful piece of clothing because having that little peak poke out the front of your helmet, it keeps the rain off your glasses. So it's really great to wear glasses. I would often wear like a clear lens glass racing or even training in bad weather. But when you have the rain constantly against it, going against your glasses, it does, like your glasses will fog up and all that sort of thing. So to wear a cap to keep the rain off your glasses is very useful. And one thing I always used to do, if it's raining, however the temperature is not too cold, you cut the top out of your cap. So it's actually open top, so it lets some of the hot air, lets your head breathe a little bit, so you get a little bit of ventilation as well. So that's a really great tip if you are wearing a cap and it's raining, but not too cold.
Okay, this next one, we might get a different answer if we were doing this interview with Bradley Wiggins. Oval chain rings or round chain rings?
For me, round chain rings. I did try at one point in my career a sort of funky shaped chain ring. I'm not even sure exactly what it was called. It wasn't completely round. And I found there were plus sides to it, particularly when you're riding in a big gear and doing sort of climbing really steep climbs. But I just didn't have that same fluence in my pedal stroke using not round chain rings. Have you ever tried
I remember
one?
Yeah, BioPace in the early 90s. This has been around for a long time.
They were really oval as well, weren't they?
Yeah, they almost looked like a AFL football. That was super oval. I tried them. It felt weird. It felt, maybe it was psychosomatic, but it felt a little jerky for me. And for the type of riding that I do now, the most important thing about my ride is the social element of it. So round chain rings for me because it's nice and simple. So yeah. I'm sticking with the round.
The elliptical chain rings, though, going back to it, There's been some very successful riders use elliptical chain rings of recent history. Like I think you mentioned, Bradley Wiggins, he won the Tour de France with an elliptical chain ring. The next year, the very following season, I think he had a personal contract with Shimano or something like that, and they said, a part of this contract, you're obliged to use round chain rings, and he went to round chain rings. He obviously tanked the season. Chris Froome still uses an elliptical style chain ring. You see his derailleur bouncing all over the place, jumping up and down. So there are some very successful riders that are convinced they work.
Yeah, well, it can't be a bad thing. Obviously, they've been successful. And like a lot of stuff to do with equipment, ultimately, it's the person who's pushing that equipment.
Yes, yeah, very much so.
Yeah. So what's more important, pre-ride breakfast or post-ride coffee?
How long are we riding?
It's you now, not you racing.
A post-ride coffee. Way more important, because I'm not riding far enough that actually it matters too much whether I have breakfast or not. But the post-ride coffee is very important.
Yeah, and my post-ride coffee needs those pastries that I took around to Dave McKenzie's place.
And my post-ride coffee is nearly as important as my pre-ride coffee.
Oh, I don't do a pre-ride coffee. You're a pre-ride coffee.
Oh, mate, I'm a coffee within 10 minutes of getting out of bed generally.
Really? I just did it for the first time in the garage on the Saturday just gone, and not because I wanted to, because I could. And I thought I've got to give this a try.
Mate, my coffee machine automatically comes on at about 5 a.m. So it's hot, ready to go for when I wake up in the morning.
Are you serious?
Absolutely.
You're not. Oh, you're joking. Rightio. Beach or mountains?
Beach. I've lived by the beach, I've lived in the mountains, and I'll take beach any day.
No, okay. Well, you're on your own. I'll come and visit you for holidays. You can come to my place to enjoy Mother Nature at its best. I love the mountains.
Yeah, mountains are a nice place to visit, especially as my comparison is I spent the vast majority of my career my racing career based in the south of France, Nice and Monaco. The last years of my career, my family and I relocated to Andorra. So you couldn't get more beach and you couldn't get more mountains than those two scenarios. And Andorra was tough. The fact that there was very little flat roads to ride on, you're basically going up or down the whole time, basically living at altitude, wore me down.
Yeah, that Andorra would wear me down as well. Absolutely. All right, we're going to wrap it up with 3 questions from our audience. The first one I quite like. This is from Brett Listrom. As an amateur racer, I'm finding Zwift racing to be really difficult in that it's full on right from the very start and you never get any rest. And watching the pro racers on Zwift, he's seen the same sort of pattern. Do you think that this will have any sort of impact on real racing on the pro scene?
Well, funnily enough, most racing on the pro team starts super hard. You may not see that bit on television. You might roll out of town quite easily in a neutral zone, but from when the flag drops, I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, the race is really on until the breakaway is established. And that might only be for a few minutes or it could go for a few hours. But generally, pro racing is hard from the start. And I think that's probably a relatively recent change because you look back 2 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, and the peloton would roll along, especially in a race like the Giro d'Italia, like we were speaking about earlier, and the peloton would roll along for 30 k's an hour for the first half of the stage. These days, the racing is really competitive right from the start. So I'm not sure how much of an impact this Zwift racing will change that because I think it already happens.
Yeah, you take a look at the pattern of the average speed of stages at the Tour, and the first hour and the last hour are the fastest. That first hour to try and get the break established, particularly if it's a day that is classified as a transitional day. So it's not really a day for the sprinters. It's not quite a day for the guys in the high mountains to race for the yellow jersey. And then you get a really wide spread of guys who think they're a chance to win that day. And if you see Thomas de Gendt near that red car through the neutral zone, you know it's going to be quick at the start.
Yeah. Yeah, there are always a few key guys that you sort of see them up the front, behind the commissaire's car in the neutral zone. You think, we're in for a tough start today.
He would have been one of them that made everybody nervous. All right, this is a good one. This is from Dave Howie, and this, I'll be interested in your perspective on this when you were racing. How do cyclists feel about the roller coaster ride of every 2 or 3 years, sponsorships are coming to an end, or the team then finds a commitment for an extended period of time? It looks really unstable. How does that impact on you as an athlete? And can you see any changes to the model that could be implemented to make it more sustainable? I can't see the solution.
I can't see a solution. I can't see an obvious solution. This has obviously been something that's been discussed for many, many years. And there are different conversations about, distributing TV rights or making the teams more sustainable in that way. I think going to the question, it is emotionally a roller coaster process to go through as an athlete, not knowing whether you have any sort of future in the team just purely based on the sponsorship model. I was a part of a number of startup teams. I was a part of teams that folded when I was in mid-contract. And it's just an unstable, uncomfortable environment for everybody. And often it's not just the riders. The riders will generally find another team. Be thinking about the masseurs and the mechanics and all the bus drivers, all those sort of people that their livelihood relies on the sport and they're living sort of paycheck to paycheck. You really feel for the people in that situation.
Yeah, for sure. And we always talk about the prospect of the event organisers sharing the media rights as well. But then you look at the Tour de France, that's the obvious one. But if they want to share those media rights from ASO with the Tour de France, are they prepared to carry the risk of the races that ASO organise that don't generate any income, that actually lose money, that are dependent on the media rights that they sell at the Tour de France? It's really difficult. And the governing body, the UCI, is really just a team that implements the rules, as opposed to a governing body such as the AFL that pulls it all together, or the NFL or the NBA or something along those lines. I can't see a clear, simple solution. If there was one, it would have been implemented.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Right. Final question. David Blom, one of the regulars. This is a good one. Is there ever a point in a race where you've actually been able to enjoy the scenery? And his follow-up question here, Seb PK, he's the voice of the race radio on all the ASO races. Does he give any insights throughout the race about what's happening on the side of the road? As a rider, you don't get to hear Seb PK, but when you're in a team car, you hear him, or if you're in the commentary box, you get to hear him. And he doesn't really go into any editorial. He keeps it pretty straight up and down. Time gaps, any rider that's coming to the back of the peloton calling with a mechanical problem or so on. He keeps it pretty straight. But did you ever get an opportunity to look along and figure, well, have a look at where I'm riding today?
Not in racing. You're so focused on the job at hand when you're racing, and that's whether it be in trying to just win the race or simply trying to make the time cut. You're really focused on the job at hand. However, when you're doing a recon of a race in a training environment where it's a bit more relaxed, you're not sort of under the pump so much, that's when you are at a fortunate point in time that you can actually soak up the environment a little bit and really take in the scenery and the mountains. Because I was very lucky to race in some spectacular parts of the world. So yeah, that's your one point in time when you get to do a recon that you get to soak it up. But it's interesting about this question about receiving said PK via the race radio. There was some talk a few years ago when there was a lot of talk about eliminating race radios of actually having one channel that went to all the riders. And that could have been a really interesting concept, to have someone call any dangerous points out or anything like that. That was a channel that went to all the riders. What do you think about that?
That puts a lot of risk and liability onto the race organizer who provides a race radio, which is why that wouldn't have been implemented. Because then if there was a pothole around a corner that race radio didn't inform the riders of and somebody got hit with a serious injury, there's a lawsuit on your hands.
Yeah, right. So it was basically they didn't want the extra responsibility.
That's what I think.
Yeah. But the race,
that's what I think.
The race radios generally anyway, they're so unreliable of getting that information back from the car. So it would be very difficult for someone to lump that one on the race organizer if they didn't get a message.
Yeah, so I think that they were pretty keen to step away from that, and I completely understand why. Gerard, that brings us to a close of another episode of Cycling Insights.
Thanks, Matt. Enjoyed it as always.
Thanks a lot for listening to Cycling Insights, brought to you by L'Etape Australia by Tour de France. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on your favourite podcast app, and leave us a review. We'll see you on the road.